Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by, seeing as how I recently saw for the very first time The Stepfather from 1987. I thought it only made sense to see for the very first time and review The Stepfather 2, Make Room for Daddy, and review that as well. Obviously, since I just saw it, my history with The Stepfather 1, or in this case Stepfather 2, doesn't go very far back at all. I can't necessarily remember if the cover for Stepfather 1 wasn't amazing, but I can for sure remember seeing the cover for Stepfather 2 in video stores in the, it would have been probably early, all throughout the 90s, early 90s, mid to late 90s and stuff. So this cover was definitely something I can remember seeing in video stores back in the day. But as I said in my review of Stepfather, the first film, this isn't really like my kind of necessarily genre. I'm more of like a Freddy, Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Chucky kind of a guy, and not so into like just the normal everyday kind of guy just being a nut job and wanting to have the perfect family, and if he doesn't get it, go crazy kind of a thing. Having seen the first Stepfather and having that ended, I don't think I spoiled how that ended, and I'm not going to spoil how it ended in this review. I'll just simply say that the way the first film ended, I was like, how the hell can there be a sequel with Terry O'Quinn? And that kind of spoils possibly maybe the way it ended, the first Stepfather film. I feel like I'm going to accidentally say Godfather sometime throughout the course of this review. It just rolls off the tongue easier than Stepfather. I'm pretty sure I'll probably say Godfather, so be prepared for me to say Godfather. But having seen, the first film, Stepfather, or the first Godfather film, I was like, how the hell can Terry O'Quinn come back in a sequel? And I was like, well, it must be a prequel or something, like to see what he did earlier before the first film. Well, it turns out, nope, it's a sequel to the first film. And it's like, I guess, at first when he, there's a flashback at the end of the first film, and then at the beginning of this movie, and at first I thought it was going to be the whole first movie was going to be a dream, and then when he wakes up, I'm like, see, oh my God, it was a dream. But then he looks and sees the scar, and I'm like, okay, so this guy is pretty tough if he can, so I will just simply say survive what happened to him at the end of the first movie. So instantly that was kind of obviously fakey. Like, I don't think that's really a survivable kind of a situation, unfortunately, but it's a movie, it's a dumb horror movie, a sequel to a horror movie, so we're not going to get too tough on that. But one thing before I go further into the review I want to say is this movie was directed by Jeff Burr, who would go on to direct Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, probably right after doing this film. And it's really interesting because, I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 in first run in the theater in January of 1990, I want to say. So the first thing off the bat, or I guess I can't say the first thing, but one of the things that's interesting about the cast in this movie is it's got quite an interesting cast, honestly. And, we've got none other than Caroline Williams, who will go on to make an appearance, of course, that really brief cameo in Chainsaw 3. And now I understand, how that was able to happen, because Jeff Burr worked with her previously in this movie on more extensively, so he knew her. And he probably just said, hey, you want to just walk on Chainsaw 3 and walk off as a reporter? And, you may or may not be Stretch, continuing to follow the Chainsaw situation. But not only Stretch from Chainsaw 3, but also the woman who played Mama in Chainsaw 3 can also be found for, I think, a couple scenes in the psychiatry scenes in this movie. So you've got that going on. You've also got Meg Foster, who in the year later, 1990, would go on to be in Blind Fury, also with Terry O'Quinn. I don't think they have any scenes together, but in Blind Fury, I think Terry O'Quinn and Meg Foster were previously married and now divorced couple with the young son, who's of course heavily featured in Blind Fury with Rutger Hauer. So it's just like, wow, as I watched this film and the second film with Beth, and I'm like, wow, a year later, she just bugs the hell out of her when I pause the movie and tell her this shit. I'm like, pause. Oh wow, a year later, this Terry O'Quinn guy, the Stepfather, And the Meg Foster chick, they're getting all, romantic or whatever. They'd appear in the same movie a year later, and they're divorced. So it's kind of like, wow, it's kind of like Stepfather 3 or something. But and then I pressed, and Beth probably sighed and just like went whatever, and then I pressed play and resumed the movie. But those are some interesting anecdotes to worth mentioning, and also something that I never necessarily would have figured out myself. I only know it because Jeff Burr mentioned it himself in the behind the scenes of Puppet Master 4 and 5. I can't remember which one it was, probably the fourth one, or it doesn't matter, one of them. That it's really interesting how Jeff Burr's career, I don't know what his first movie was, I can only assume it was like maybe an original movie, but at some point obviously, Jeff Burr did, I was going to say Godfather, Stepfather 2, and right after that he did Chainsaw 3, and right after that he did Puppet Master 4 and 5, and he was kind of like on the actual behind the scenes of Puppet Master 4 and 5, he was like hypothesizing what the hell movie's going to do, and what worked out perfectly, unfortunately didn't end up happening, is even he said, well, I don't know what I'll do next, maybe Halloween 6. That was like, unfortunately that didn't end up happening, but that would have been just wild, do Stepfather 2, Chainsaw 3, Puppet Master 4 and 5, and Halloween 6. Wouldn't that have been just unbelievable? But God, am I going to review the movie in this video? Another notable in this cast worth mentioning is a kid who became relatively popular, and if I'm remembering or understanding correctly, I think he's one of the child actors who was reported to have passed on at an earlier age. I don't think he's no longer with us, but the kid who'd go on to be in Sequest, and probably, I think he's in the Chuck Norris movie Sidekicks, which I've never seen, but I've seen the cover art for that. A kid who was a relatively popular child teen actor is also in this as the son of the Meg Foster character. So there's actually a decent amount of recognizable faces in this movie, and right off the bat that was actually kind of impressive. I was like, wow. And the interesting thing about this movie is it's like, I don't know, when was Silent Night, Deadly Night 2? Was that 87 possibly, or 86 or 87? What's interesting about this movie is the beginning starts very much like what would end up happening with basically all the first half or whatever of the majority of the first half of Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, where the Terry O'Quinn stepfather character is in whatever, in this mental hospital, whatever, security hospital, jail, prison thing, whatever, ward, and he's being he has ongoing sessions with this psychiatrist guy, and he was like completely like, I'm gonna let my guard down to show you I trust you, which means to show you you can trust me in these talks or whatever. And they kind of went on just, a couple or two or three of them or whatever, very brief bits and pieces throughout the course of the movie. But of course in the mental house, the shop class, he can still build things, like he builds this house, and it kind of plays into the way he escapes. I won't spoil how he escapes, kind of creative. And instantly I was kind of like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. Although I thought it was kind of fakey that the character survived after what he endured at the end of the first film, I did think that, fakey or not, like the way this movie opens and the way he escapes and stuff is very kind of cool, and kind of quickly won me back in a way. So what? So what? He's alive, and that's completely unrealistic. Look at how cool. Look at these cool ideas we're coming up with, and look at what we're doing. So I mean, in one aspect, that was cool, the way he snuck out and everything. But of course, just like we've seen him do once or whatever, and just started to see him to begin to do in the first film, a second time he does in this film. And before I forget to mention it, not that I could, because I think it's my overall favorite thing about this movie, is, unlike, admittedly Friday the 13th being my favorite franchise, admittedly, and I have no problem with it, the movies just kind of do the same thing over and over and over, and I have no problem with it. It's one of the things I love about the Friday the 13th franchise. But admittedly, with sequels and horror sequels, or any kind of sequels really, it's kind of more or less, doing the same thing over and over. And what I think was really amazing, maybe not really amazing, but cool about the sequel to Stepfather 2, is that, that we spend most of the first film, they're already married, and with the situation of the daughter, trying to figure out, not to mention the only surviving member of the last family that he butchered, trying to hunt him down. So the first film, it revolves around when the movie starts a year, whatever, and it's a year later, we catch up with him a year later, he's married, and in the marriage, and we see it devolve until the end. What's really cool about this film, the second one, is that it's not the same thing. He's not just, we don't cut to a year later after he escapes and he's married. What's really cool about this movie is it shows the progression, the beginning of the meeting of the potential new wife and family, being the kid from, whatever, sidekicks, and go on to be in Sequest. It's like, this movie is meeting the family and trying to get to the altar. And what's really cool about, I won't spoil too much of it, about the end of the movie, is it's like, you kind of like, as the movie is getting towards the end, you kind of like, are they going to get to the altar? Are they going to get to the altar? And it's really kind of cool what ends up happening with just like, wedding day, everyone's, sitting in the room waiting for the bride and groom, and just kind of like they get into a kind of a physical altercation. Even the kid is a part of it, if memory serves, and it's just kind of funny because I'm not a big, I'm never gonna, I knew when I was a kid and my parents got divorced and when I was young, I knew I was never gonna get married, because I as a kid, it was a blow to me. It was just like, well, I thought marriage is supposed to be, you say your vows and death to us part and shit. And it felt like when my parents got divorced, I was like, it felt like a huge, it just hit me hard on a like a moral level. I'm like, I thought it's supposed to be a lifetime thing, and you're just gonna give up or whatever. I mean, it's probably for the best, but when I was a kid, I'm just like, well, I don't want to, break the vow or be a liar or so I'm never gonna get married. So I don't know where the hell that came from, but I was gonna say that I'm not any kind of marriage enthusiast, quite the opposite. But it was really funny to see. Oh, what I was saying is, being a kind of an anti-marriage individual, it was fun seeing like the chaos at the end of the movie on the wedding day, of just violence and carnage and stuff, and the way that it unfolds. And it was really cool. By the end of the movie, I'm like, wow, this is really cool. But it's the same thing to a certain extent, but it's different in the fact that it's like it's the whole movie's about the hope, the quest of hopefully getting to the altar, and the things that get in the way of that. And of course, that would ultimately not end up happening. I guess I kind of spoiled it, but yeah, so that was it. So technically, like, he's not even the stepfather in this movie, which is kind of like, it's another thing that's like, huh, so he's not a stepfather because they never got married. But it's about obviously just this Terry O'Quinn character from the first film. Just it's also, obviously, you're not supposed to think about this, but it's fakey how he's just able to. Oh, he robs some guy. He robs a car from some guy in the parking lot, who just happens to be carrying like hundreds and hundreds of, probably thousands of dollars in cash. So it kind of, obviously the whole factor of like this Terry O'Quinn breaking out of the nut house, the mental ward, and just all of a sudden just establishing himself with the house, and the job. That's another thing I want to mention that I think is really funny about the sequel, is I don't know, I'm really confused, like, if he's really got a job as a shrink, or if he's just pretending like he's got a job as a shrink. I guess it doesn't really matter. But what's so funny is, he was like I think he was a real realtor in the first movie, but in this movie he's a quote-unquote shrink. And like I say, I don't know if in the context of the movie, if he's just masquerading as a shrink, or if he really is a shrink. I don't see how he could really become a shrink without considerable amount of schooling and degrees and all this kind of bullshit. But I think for all intents purposes, I guess he can just be masquerading as a shrink. And I think it's really funny how, like, he's like an anti-shrink individual, and then he's pretending to be kind of what he doesn't like, which is a kind of towards the head shrinking industry from his point of view. Like, I'm gonna moonlight as this profession, which I think is just a joke. And it was also kind of satisfying to see, don't take this the wrong way, internet, but it was kind of satisfying to see what he does to the shrink at the beginning of the movie. I've talked about briefly my relationship as a child with head shrinkers, as it were. Feel free to check out the review to the first Stepfather film if you want to see my brief story on my idea, my thoughts on psychiatrists or psychologists or head shrinkers, whatever you want to call them. So that's what this movie's about. Unlike the first film when he's married, the first film was interesting. In a way, it kind of is a prequel, like a sequel prequel at the same time, because the first film was about him married and how the marriage degraded over the course of the film, and then he was gonna, once he got to where the family is no longer perfect in his eyes, he was gonna go shopping for a new family and then end this family. And the second film is about like the shopping for the family and trying to get in good, with the woman and the, in this case the kid. And I thought it only made sense that there was a daughter in the first film, so we'll have a son in the second film. Makes sense, maybe the third film has twins, we'll see. But it did, watching these first two, obviously, and the third film being free on Prime, I didn't think I was necessarily going to watch the third film, but I'm going to, since it's free. Beth and I, we've both kind of got OCD, or as I like to call it, OCP, Obsessive Compulsive Persuasion. We both kind of got that, so we're going to probably watch Stepfather 3, so I would expect more than likely a review from me of Stepfather 3. I don't know if the remake is anywhere for free. I would imagine if it is, possibly expect a review of the remake after my review of Stepfather 3. We shall see, but I think that is more or less the sequel. And I had someone that recently, in the past several weeks or months or whatever, requested that I review Stepfather 1 and 2, and his contention was the second one is better than the first, and I actually agree. I think, the first had its fun bits and stuff, but it was really cool. I think what they did with the second one was somehow just more creative, and like it was just, I think it was funner to see him trying to get to the altar than the degradation of the family dynamic in the first film that was after the altar. It was because it was kind of like a maybe not a race per se, but as a viewer, you know how obsessed this Terry O'Quinn character is with like being in the perfect marriage or whatever. And it was kind of interesting as the movie wears on, because it's like, you're aware of the fact that this movie is going on and on and on, and it's like they're not married yet, and it's kind of like, are they gonna, what's gonna happen? Is he gonna get married and kill his family at the altar or whatever? Which would have been kind of cool. We'll see what happens in Stepfather 3, but obviously Terry O'Quinn is not in Stepfather 3. I'm aware of that. I could only assume that. Well, this probably was straight to video. I don't know my history on the Stepfather films at all. I can only assume maybe Stepfather was possibly in the theater. I don't know, but I don't imagine Stepfather 2 was in the theater, and definitely I can't imagine Stepfather 3 being in the theater. But definitely, like, I can remember seeing, I think, Stepfather 2 and 3 covers in the video store. Not necessarily sure if I can remember seeing Stepfather 1 cover, but my star rating for Stepfather 2, I can't remember what I gave the first one. It might be the same star rating, even though I think the second one's more entertaining. I think it was like 2.5 stars out of 4 stars for the first film. I think, well, if that's the case, regardless, I'm going to give Stepfather 2, was it Make Room for Daddy, probably 2.5 stars out of 4 stars as well. It's like, even though these movies aren't necessarily my cup of tea per se, they are fun just seeing like Terry O'Quinn. I think I briefly talked about my former history with that actor in my review of the first film, and just like I've never seen him. He's always usually just like the nice guy or something in movies, and I've never seen him as this maniacal character, and it's fun to see him as the maniacal character. And it was fun to see, I've pretty much only more or less seen Caroline Williams in a relatively sizable, more sizable part in Chainsaw 2. I mean, I've seen her in other things in smaller parts, but she's relatively got a decent sized part in this movie. It was fun to see her, like, what was it, like just 2 years or so, 2 or 3 years after Chainsaw 2 and stuff. So it's funny to see her as a male woman, a postal worker and stuff, and just the little details about her. The same thing with like the first movie, the daughter trying to sneak around and trying to figure out who this guy is, like Caroline Williams, like committing a federal offense and looking at Terry O'Quinn's mail and stuff, and it's just fun to see the drama. The Stepfather movies are kind of like, like I said about my review of the first movies, they're really not necessarily horror movies, they're like thriller, but this one I'd almost kind of consider, I suppose the first one too, like soap operas, soap opera horror movie, like just like the drama that ensues with, you know, this guy trying to conceal his identity and other people like slowly finding out, like, oh hey, you said this and not this, or what's with this and that, and where'd you get this wine, and you know, you taught whoever the whistle this or whatever. So I guess that'll about do it for my review of The Godfather Part 2. Just kidding. The Stepfather 2, Make Room for Daddy. And as I said, more or less probably expect a review of Stepfather 3, and possibly if we can see it for free, the possibly the remake as well. So I guess that'll pretty much do it for this review. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, we'll catch you on the next video.